BOCCHI the Rock has been an amazingly colourful and often surprisingly accurate dive into the world of underground music here in Japan, but the 7th episode takes us on a whole new direction. See, as much as I love exploring the accurate way the show shows the real-life music locations like Shimokitazawa and The Shelter, what really makes BOCCHI work is the way it fills those locations with the fantastic characters who exist somewhere between accurate depictions of musical stereotypes anyone in the scene would recognise and engagingly colourful characters who play off each other to create heartwarming and comical situations. And character is exactly what episode 7 is about, as we start on a hot, now summer's day with Kita and Nijika en route to visit the timid BOCCHI at her house. The first time they will have been in her home, and as Nijika points out, one of the few times they've ventured outside of their home base of the live house, Starry. Quickly we get the characters re-established as Kita talks about her excitement to see BOCCHI's house for the first time, whilst being concerned at hearing that BOCCHI had compared it to her signature cardboard box from episode 1. Kita therefore showing her ambitious but caring shine. Nijika establishes her motive by reminding Kita that the purpose of their visit is to design new t-shirts for Kesoku Band so they have a stage uniform, ever the driven band leader despite her gentle agreeableness. And all of this conversation overlaid with cutaways to BOCCHI's socks kneading the carpet in anticipation of her friend's arrival. The insanely socially awkward lead character in our story, posed and ready for an encounter that could be straight out of a sitcom. This week's script also quickly sidelines the 4th character in the band and my personal favourite Ryo from proceedings in a fantastic little bit of dialogue and cutaway humour that again goes miles towards confirming who she is both in the quartet and in their relationship as a group of people. Ryo had claimed she could not attend today because her grandmother's health had taken a turn for the worse, but then Nijika begins to list the various other excuses that Ryo has given for not turning up for things in the past. The dog she doesn't have that is always ill, the parents who were in a car crash, the discovery of a long lost twin, the many other times her grandmother has previously been ill. All of this whilst we see footage of Ryo standing in a record store listening to music and having an obviously very carefree kind of day. Simply put, Ryo isn't interested and has no feeling of guilt about manipulating the truth for an easy pass. Kita, ever obsessed with her senpai, compliments the creative range of excuses, which is both a correct assessment of Ryo's imaginative approach to getting what she wants, but misses how obviously the nonchalant blue-haired genius always puts herself a little bit too much first. Anyway, at this point, 2 minutes in, so much has already been established, and thus we arrive at BOCCHI's house, and the BOCCHI sitcom is ready to begin. As Kita and Nijika arrive at their destination, they see a huge banner welcoming Kesoku Band to the house, and my initial question was, how the hell did she get that thing up there on her own? There's no obvious means and it looks heavy as hell, but this comically sets the tone for the entire upcoming episode as Hitori wildly attempts to overachieve as a host and do almost anything to achieve that idyllic house party she has probably only ever experienced through watching TV shows in the past. Certainly never in person, certainly never in her house. And thus, moments later, we're treated to the now iconic image of Hitori standing at the front door in her pink outfit adorned in a party sergeant sash with Elton John-esque star sunglasses that seem to glow as she bursts a party popper towards her friends who stand in stunned silence at the doorway. I love everything about how this scene plays out. The fact that we never see the door actually open, we just cut straight to the awkward moment. It's so beautifully set up by the aforementioned lengthy, natural conversation between Nijika and Kita. The open mouth expressions as they now stand confronted with this scene, somewhere between their initial smiles of being happy to be there and navigating the bizarre situation they just realised they've walked into. Then the sudden cut to the intro. And then the way that the whole moment continues to linger even after the intro. It's just a really great iconic moment. But after some kind words from Kita, whose gifts even shine it would appear, successfully we move the situation along, even though the crestfallen Hitori now leads the girls up to her room looking quite sullen before briefly stepping out to get some drinks for them. Although I did find it a little odd that such a protectively introverted girl would be leaving her friends so quickly alone in her bedroom, even if to just briefly get drinks, this does lead to Kita and Nijika having a hilarious crash course in Hitori's hitherto hidden home life. Now left alone in the insanely over-decorated party bedroom, Kita and Nijika quickly start looking for indications of what their friend's home life is really like, initially only seeing a guitar and effects unit and nothing else of any note in the room. A couple of blunders later though, and BOCCHI's stacks of obsessively reproduced copies of the band picture have scattered on the floor in plain view. Banners warding off evil are revealed, and younger sister Futari has appeared with her usual tiny overconfidence to spill all the beans about her older sister's equally bizarre behaviour at home. In so doing though, Futari's extroverted cuteness wins over Nijika and Kita, who finally start to find themselves actually having some fun. Bizarrely, Futari is the first semblance of normality they have to grab onto since entering the house. Now at this point though, I must share a possibly minority opinion, especially coming from someone like myself who was a youngest child, but I feel like Futari's character is well written if you assume she is written to be kind of annoying. The shrill overconfidence, the lack of respect for Hitori's privacy, she is perfectly written to be the archetypal overconfident 5-year-old who's only charming if you don't actually have to live with her. Marching in alongside cute Shiba Inu Jimmy Hen to lay out all the details to the confused teenagers in the room, it's no wonder she won them over, but it's also no wonder poor Hitori immediately felt alienated upon returning to her room with the drinks and seeing everyone already happy without her. Luckily, BOCCHI resourcefully bribes her sister out of the way with promises of treats, and now with that first hurdle out of the way, the girls can finally get down to what they are actually here for in the first place, as Nijika has been so assertively reminding them, ever the leader, and that is designing a band t-shirt, so they can go on stage with a bit of unity to their look. I've mentioned it in previous reviews, but I have to give credit to the fact that this is such a genuine part of how bands work here in Japan. Things like the outward marketability is treated with a sense of creative fun and serious vision for how they want to be seen when on stage. It's not like a metal band just wearing black clothes and pre-recognised metal fashion items, or a pop group trying to wear whatever is currently most in style. These bands give serious thought to their own unique identity, something that you often see in local live houses. This is not to say every band has a uniform, but many do, or at least some kind of curated image. I remember the first time I saw Caramel Candid, a band I work with here in Tokyo who are superb musicians with quite deep emotional songs, but on top of that being a band who direct their own music videos, write their own songs, make their own merchandise, play every note, and yes, got matching pink maid dresses that obviously counter their usually quite deep introspective sound. And yes, they even paid for all of it, despite still being an education themselves. Okay, they may well be one of my favourite bands in the local scene, yes, but they're certainly not isolated, as much as I may personally consider them a pretty peak example. Anyway, back to Kesoku Band, minus Ryo. The three members start diving into creating shirt concepts that they can all show to each other and choose between at the end of the visit. Kita starts pretty quickly by creating and revealing a very preppy school sports day looking shirt with bright colours and words evoking victory, unity, positive vibes, all the things that cause Hitori to have a near emotional breakdown, and yeah, breakdown she pretty spectacularly does. BOCCHI's regressions into her own mind make up some of the series' most famous scenes, and most creative scenes it must be said, but this one, caused by the sheer thought of school sports spirits, is both amongst the most epic, whilst also actually being a fantastic indictment of the very concept of school sports. For example, you may be familiar with a few of the things that make Japanese culture seem so harmonious from the outside, whether it be the stunningly low crime rates without an oppressive police presence on the street everywhere you go. Maybe it's the way Japanese children are known to understand that they must clean their own classrooms every day. Or maybe you've heard the stories of Japanese sports fans visiting events like the World Cup in other countries or the Olympics and cleaning up both theirs and other people's litter before leaving the stadium. All of this comes from the broad concept in Japan of the importance of, well, the group. Behaving properly so as to not let the side down, respecting the importance of traditions and rules even if you consider yourself maybe part of a counterculture group on the side. it still seems to be very much in the back of most people's heads to put the importance of group harmony first. And now these things can be overly simplified by those trying to make Japan seem like a utopian paradise, or overly criticised by those trying to insinuate Japan has no room for individuality, and it would take me a much longer video to simply unpack this single subject, but I would say it is a mentality that is overall an incredible positive for Japan and Japanese life, in my opinion at least, and does allow freedom of expression in certain correct places. Japan is famous for its myriad of healthy subcultures after all, from Harajuku fashion to the Yankee crowd who dance in the park every week, to Japan's love of sports, love of pop culture, and even train spotters. These are all healthy subcultures that do not really mock or degrade each other and are inhabited by people who, between the intervening weekday hours, are probably all likely to be found in their identical offices or schools, all in their identical suits or uniforms. So why this tangent? Well, despite my assessment that the Japanese way of life is actually a net positive, it also gives context to the very thing that Hitori is escaping from when she disappears into music and her own thoughts, or hangs out with her band friends in the basement dwelling of Starry. For all her bright Kita shine, Kita's t-shirt design is exposing Hitori to the thing she fears most of all, and her resulting cutaway beautifully encapsulates why this group mentality is so horrifying for someone who just doesn't feel like they fit in. She dramatically talks in her head about the right to individuality being stripped away and the expectation for even non-athletes to use their free time to work on preppy cheers and banners for an event they couldn't care less about. The demonic red stop-motion animation, the strained cello music, the zombie-like chants of school spirit cheers, it all quickly stirs up a brilliant picture of the melodramatic panic in her head even hearing about school sports. But it's not like what she's saying doesn't actually make a little bit of sense underneath the comical hyperbole also. So I'd say that this rather overdramatic scene, as creative as it is, also gives a very interesting view of how certain introverts deal with quite possibly one of the most important and harmonious aspects of Japanese culture, or at least the dark side it can have for those who don't always fit in so well. Then, as the inner monologue of Bocchi's breakdown continues even beyond the Bocchi the Rock TV show's commercial break, a point that Nijika even points out in a rather unusual fourth wall break, we cut to a dramatic anime scene of now Hitori being hunted down and sacrificed by the zombie-like adherents of school spirits, thus showing how deep her introverted imagination is inclined to take things and just how much she's dwelling on this simple thing that was evoked simply by seeing a rather preppy t-shirt design. Now, whilst all this has been happening, Bocchi's parents had returned from the shops where they'd been up until this point in the episode to be met with the shock of seeing guests' shoes in the hallway and young Futari confirming Nijika and Kita's arrival. It's not that the parents were unaware of the day's plans, but it turns out that they simply assumed that Hitori's friends were imaginary. Thus, they quickly come up to the room and invite the girls all down for some food and friendly get-together in the living room. At first, this is really great and does present a little bit more normalcy for Kita and Nijika to grab onto. The parents expressing their suspicion that the Kosoku band photos were faked though, or politely asking if Nijika and Kita had been hired from a friend's service. These felt pretty harsh, although understandable, but do demonstrate how much they care about their daughter's struggles. The father seems particularly glad about how they met, several times stating how music brings people together, and with an almost cringe-inducingly overly enthusiastic no music, no life picture actually framed in their living room. I mean, you have two daughters, a wife, a dog, and that corporate slogan somehow found a frame in your living room? I mean, at least get a good gig poster. I know I would. But hey, for all the awkwardness, the Gotohs continue to give the impression of your classic, warm, caring, nuclear family, perfectly suited for the sitcom nature of this episode. Oh, but Bocchi is still paralysed by her school pep fear, even now since they've all come down to the living room. A state that is finally broken, and may I say, in one of the most realistic scenes in all of Bocchi the Rock, by the smell of freshly cooked karaage. That's some Japanese fried chicken, just in case you didn't know. Freshly cooked karaage really does solve everything. Best fried chicken in the world. Believe me, you have to try it. If you don't believe it, just try it. Anyway, however, the delicate undertone of family home cooking being the remedy at least does help to support the feeling of love that Bocchi really does feel for her home and family, despite her reclusive and secretive nature. And so, Nijika and Kita tell Hitori's parents the whole story so far, a story that she herself would never have really detailed for them in anything more than the occasional clue, admission, or, well, request for ticket purchases, which does bring up an interesting question. If her parents had thought that the band was likely imaginary, why on earth did they think she was going on with selling tickets for a live band show in the last episode? Did they think that the entire gig was made up or imaginary? I mean, that seems even harsher, to be honest with you. Anyway, a full fun get-together is had with food, games and movies in the living room before the three Kesoku band girls finally retire back to the bedroom to see if they can finally complete their t-shirt target. Everyone is fulfilled. The parents are overjoyed with having realised the reality of the friends. Nijika and Kita are fed and had watched a movie, and even Futari is asleep on the couch downstairs. Everyone is fine, except, well, Bocchi, still looking to salvage one last victory from the day that she did so much to organise. It seems like everything has succeeded in spite of her rather than due to her, and I actually felt quite touched by how hard she works on her t-shirt design in order to finally score at least one win. Given all we've seen of Bocchi up until this point, designing clothing for the group and then having to present even a suggestion of what she thinks will look good, it sounds like something she would be terrified of. And as she finally unveils her work, you can see how she is required to reignite the same bold facade of confidence that brought her to the door in her absurd party gear at the very top of this episode. Unfortunately, well, this was never going to be her great moment of success. The shirt design she unveils certainly shows an eagerness to please, but looks like an indulgence in lame rock stereotypes. And I particularly laughed when Nijika so accurately pointed out the use of mysterious looking fonts that tend to adorn the black shirts of edgelord teenagers. Well, I laughed, then I paused to check if I didn't have any band shirts that looked like that in my cupboard. Then I got right back to chuckling again. Despite Bocchi giving good explanation of all of her creative decisions, it's pretty clear that the design isn't a winner and is thus met with the polite declining of her bandmates. However, this final attempt at victory ultimately seals Hitori's final downfall in the context of this sitcom episode, and much like a British-style sitcom, think Fawlty Towers, the story is only ever leading to the crushing crescendo of all heartfelt efforts culminating in the downfall of our protagonist. And so it is that Bocchi's very brave effort of even offering a design leads to questions of what she normally likes to wear. Then her admission that her mum buys her clothes normally. Then her admission that she doesn't usually wear them. Then the over-enthusiastic peer pressure of her friends asking her to quickly model these more girly clothes that her mum has bought for them to admire and see for a little bit of a change. And yes, Nijika and Kita bask in the newfound cuteness of their pet Bocchi, taking pictures and saying how cute she is. But the attention on her physical appearance, even positively, uncovers possibly the only thing Bocchi fears more than school sports spirits. And thus we get to the final climax of this episode, and it's quite possibly one of the weirdest scenes in the entire Bocchi the Rock series. Now, I should preface this by saying that I am aware that for all the musical references woven into this series, it does also pull from anime influences pretty heavily as well. I do know that. If you've been following this channel, you'll know that Bocchi the Rock is actually the first anime I've ever watched in its entirety, and I am approaching this solely as an active participant in the Japanese music scene who is ready to be schooled on anime at every turn should you more informed listeners wish to do so. So okay, do let me know where this scene gets its inspiration or what it's referencing should you wish in the comments, but just in reference to what I'm seeing, in dramatic fashion, as Nijika goes one step too far in reaching to comb Bocchi's bangs back and expose her face, time suddenly halts. In a scene that lasts a whole minute and a half, Bocchi turns to ash. Her bandmates declare her dead before inhaling the fumes of Bocchi spores now going into the air, getting the depression from breathing them in, and then also collapsing to the ground in defeat as well, apologising for their shortcomings in life. You could call this all a metaphor, but then the rest of the family come in to find them collapsed, and Nijika uses her final twitch of her dying finger to send a message to Ryo declaring that she needs to go on alone without them. I know I'm going to annoy more die-hard fans with this, but I remember just basically feeling lost during this scene the first time I watched it. It doesn't work as a metaphor because absolutely nothing up until this point suggests that Bocchi's behaviour was rubbing off on Kita or Nijika, and it's played out incredibly literally by the inclusion of the other characters, rather than it just being an isolated metaphor contained within the room. Frankly, it feels like a really weird resolution, and one that I gotta say was a bit unsatisfying. For all of Bocchi the Rock's playful flights into metaphor and hyperbole that so beautifully accentuate everything that is so relatable and real about the character's world and their interactions, this felt more like a quick sidestep to wrap up the storyline. Likely very rewarding for the anime familiar, but I found it rather alienating and like it derailed the momentum of the episode. That being said, if nothing else, it is pretty definitive and does put a very clear ending to this piece of the narrative as we cut quickly to a scene subtitled as being several days later. Cutting to the band rehearsal room, we see the leader Nijika has chosen to simply go for a bold band logo on a black t-shirt. This actually immediately looks pretty good, and it's a fun reference to the fact that nearly every band sells a t-shirt like this. Despite liking colourful things usually, I must admit that when I buy a band shirt, I tend to lean towards these designs even myself. After all, the band logo is often an interesting design in its own right, as Kisoku bands absolutely is too, with that orbiting zip tie. And hey, if you want to proudly wear your allegiance to a band, what could be better than just showing it off nice and boldly with the band logo? The cool, simple, impactful design even leaves Bocchi wondering to herself why this design wasn't just chosen from the start. And apart from a bit of dialogue a little bit earlier where Nijika was stating that she wanted to go for different and more artistic designs to try and pump up merch sales, I've got to be honest, I agree with Bocchi. I mean, either way, you're still going to want to sell these shirts and they do look good. But I do also like how Nijika is shown in this moment as Bocchi is thinking to herself, psychically guessing what Bocchi is thinking. And you can see at least that the conclusion of this episode is that the band members are really starting to get to understand how Hitori thinks, how she ticks. But just as importantly, in the same scene, Hitori looks down at her matching band shirt with glistening eyes and a sense of belonging which demonstrates that she's feeling like part of something finally. For all her earlier fear of being harassed by group identity when school sports were brought up, this group identity has the opposite impact on her. A beautiful contrast. It's something that actually really does connect to who she is underneath. But interrupting this moment, the episode ends with the band suddenly noticing news of an incoming typhoon that has been foreshadowed throughout this episode in the background. A typhoon that is taking a turn towards Tokyo on the day of their concert, thus setting us up for our next challenge in the following episode. If I were to draw conclusions about episode 7 of Bocchi the Rock though, I would say that it's absolutely an oddball episode, giving us a fun sitcom setting and allowing us to see the characters bounce off of each other in a different way. It certainly does also aid in the growth of Bocchi's character, although I think it is more about allowing the other girls to get to know her, an aspect we perhaps overlook in the majority of this series as we primarily follow Hitori's perspective. The fourth wall break in the earlier part of the episode has a little bit of charm as the events of this whole story are not overly consequential, and so there's a little bit of room for the writers to let off some steam and have some fun with the characters. But I have to maintain that the Bocchi death scene just made no sense to me beyond perhaps anime homage that I just did not get. It seemed a little bit narratively out of place, but okay. I mean, did the girls leave the house on good terms? You know, these are all things slightly muddied by that. Do the parents actually now think that Kita and Nijika are depressed or dead? I know these aren't important questions, but this is how the narrative is concluded, so it didn't work for me. Ultimately though, episode 7 adds a really nice bit of variation to the series right at its midpoint, just as the girls are close enough together to have some nice natural interaction, but also before the both metaphorical and literal storm hits. I heard that in the theatrical run of Bocchi, this episode was largely cut from the narrative, and I can mostly see why due to its less consequential position in the overall story. but I for one enjoyed this opportunity to see the characters breathe a little. Ultimately, and as I will get to later in the series, we want a good narrative to have a solid conclusion, and when it's over, it should be satisfyingly over. Therefore, in the middle of a story, we are invested in the characters and their scenario, but before the final stakes are confronted, we should get to have a little time with our beloved characters and enjoy their world with them, to relish in the interactions of the characters we have gotten to slowly know. And that is something that both this and the later episode on Enoshima address very differently, but indisposably well in my opinion. With episode 7, we had a nice warm summer's day off, we had a carefree episode, we had the low stakes of designing t-shirts, and it was a pleasant little romp. But now, we face down episode 8 with a lot more on the line. And it's in the episode 8 review that I will see you next, and I swear it will not take a year this time. I am planning for the next video to be out in 2 weeks, and is already well under production, I promise. So to end this video, I'm going to go off script for a moment, just talk off the cuff and just say my honest thanks to everyone who's followed this channel, everyone who's here for this video right now, whether you be someone who's seeing the channel for the first time or not. As I've mentioned before, anime is a subject that I'm relatively new to. It's something that I've been around pretty much all the time being here in Japan, but I've really enjoyed BOCCHI the Rock. I'm taking in more series right now. I've watched things like Nichijou, which I know is not musically related, but still really interesting. I've got K-On, which I've started watching, things like Oshi no Ko, because I've also worked with idols. These are all things that I'm looking into, so hopefully I can give a diverse range of interesting music and anime related content after I've even finished with this Kesoku band BOCCHI the Rock series. And there's plenty more things other than just the episode reviews I'm going to be looking to go into. I might even do videos talking about equipment, which I know has been requested, locations, things about life in Japan and the music scene, maybe talking about the individual character traits, you name it. There's so much more that we can go over other than just the stories. But yes, I will be getting through the end of this rather long series, long in the amount of time it's taken to come out, and again I will try to get things much more regular now. It seems that life has a way of getting in the way, and yeah, there was a certain part of me that I think was a little bit concerned about, was I really making these episodes as good as they should be, maybe slightly doubting myself, and thus seeing people coming back and enjoying this episode will be, I'm sure, the encouragement to now get myself back on top of things. And as I said, episodes are under production at the moment. So a big thank you to you all. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. That's the YouTuber call to action that has to come at the end. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.